Hey, welcome to lesson 5, Discover Your Zone. So in this lesson, first I'll introduce a new concept called polyvagal theory, which ties the emotional state to the physical state. And understanding both of these together will cue an understanding of your stress. And then there's also the concept of the triune brain, which is kind of an oversimplification of what happens to your brain under stress. But it's kind of good to understand just the basics and a general concept of how the brain responds to stress. Another key thing about this lesson is that habit formation is key to long-term success. So I will go through what you might feel emotionally and physically to really bring home those cues so that you can develop a habit. And then finally, I'll go over some simple, easy steps that you might forget in the heat of the moment. So again, going over polyvagal theory and the triune brain, where there's the newer school of thought with the polyvagal theory and an oversimplification of the stress zones based on the vagus nerve. And then I'll go into habits, knowing your zone, and matching it to a technique to create an easy automatic response to stress. Then I'll go through the emotional and physical states so that you can learn to pay attention to your triggers and know what zone you're in. Finally, I'll go over some simple solutions that you can do. They're so easy, you're gonna wonder why you didn't think about it until you actually experience some stress. Life is available only in the present moment. Thich Nhat Hanh, who is an amazing Buddhist monk who has written amazing things, and I'm very inspired by him. So I'd recommend checking out Thich Nhat Hanh. Okay, in lesson 1.4, we went over the stress curve and where we showed how stress is good, but too much stress is bad. And I also went over how your performance drops as your stress rises. This is a chart of what we talked about to get into the flow state, which is found at the peaks of that last Yerkes-Dodson curve, the peak of that green zone, in which your skill levels really perfectly match the challenge level in front of you. And this is helpful because if you have high skill levels in stress management for any task or any activity that you do, it can help you cope with the challenge even better so that you can get to the flow state faster. And because you're at your highest performance in that Yerkes-Dodson curve, you're just like matching everything, and that's how you get into the zone. And all of this leads to this new concept called the polyvagal theory. And this is a more modern Yerkes-Dodson curve, but introduces the idea of how a nerve in your body called the vagus nerve causes these mind and body responses. At its foundation here, you can see is that green zone with a social engagement zone. And staying in this zone really helps with all of that resiliency, learning, creating connections to the people around us. Again, that social engagement zone. But as you go up in arousal, you can see on the left-hand axis there, as the autonomic nervous system becomes more activated, you move into fight or flight, which is again through the yellow, through the orange, through the red, but now into kind of this new way where fight, flight, or freeze, where the parasympathetic actually is theorized to take over again instead of the sympathetic. And so there's this hierarchical control in that autonomic nervous system. And this explains something I see in the ER pretty often. It's a condition called vasovagal syncope. And you've heard of this before. This is why people can faint at the sight of blood, or people who have a phobia of heights to kind of get dizzy just even thinking about it or seeing a picture. That emotional thing kind of kicks in and the parasympathetic starts to kick off. So when the parasympathetic kicks in, that turns down your heart rate, your blood pressure drops, and that way you're not getting perfusion or blood flow to your brain so much. And the brain's like, hey, I don't like this. Let's start losing consciousness and get you back down where gravity can take over. And that's how you can actually faint in just response to emotions. Chronically, though, if you live in this state, people, especially trauma victims, can they just live beyond that state, and they can kind of shut down, become inactive, and just can't seem to find a way out. So we're going to get into that a little bit more here. So Stephen Porges is a PhD who developed this. He has a PhD in psychiatry. And this theory, again, is kind of like a ladder where if you're in the green zone, the parasympathetic dominates through the vagus nerve, which I'll get into in a second. And you move through the stress activation where the sympathetic dominates. And then at the blue zone, at the top of freeze, the parasympathetic just shuts you down. And it's a hierarchy. So it kind of goes, goes up and down this ladder. for the autonomic nervous system. But then it also brings in this concept of neuroception, where the nervous system responds to cues of safety through multiple different ways. I'll show you. And that's how you start to scan for life threats, for danger. And that's how we kind of are aware of things we don't even fully consciously recognize that we are perceiving as stress. Why is this important? The vagus nerve, which means wander in Latin, I think that's fantastic. You can kind of see how it wanders around down through the body. It starts in that brainstem and then it goes down to all of those inner organs. It innervates or sends branches to a large portion of those visceral organs. It's what senses when your stomach hurts, when you breathe in and you feel that cold air hit your lungs, or even hot, humid air. That's how you sense it. And then even parts of the ear and throat, as you can see. And this is partly why when you have some intense emotions, you'll find people describe things like the air just got sucked out of my lungs, or it felt like the ground fell out of my feet, or my stomach dropped when I heard the news. Also, my heart got broken. An intense emotion, my heart got broken. And or maybe I have a nervous stomach. Stress goes up and you get a nervous stomach. You may get nauseous, you may throw up. Things like that is due to this nerve. Vagus nerve, as I said, is responsible for the feeling of our inner organs, but it also plays a big part in scanning for threats. As you can see, it's connected to the ear and the mouth, which are very kind of social things if you think about the way that we were built as a species. And it's been theorized that this links our mammalian evolution to the autonomic nervous system and to these experiences that we have as higher social animals. And our emotions, our attachments to each other, the way we communicate with each other, and ultimately our ability to self-regulate or even kind of co-regulate with somebody else, kind of bring down our stress level, and then calm down the whole stress system. Comes down to that this vagus nerve is activated at that brainstem level, and all of this is governed by the vagus nerve. Why does this help you discover your zone? Everybody experiences life differently depending on where you are on this polyvagal ladder. How you feel emotionally and physically can be explained by the different branches of the vagus nerve and how it works with the sympathetic nervous system. And then again, how this goes into the emotional and physical state is that there's the emotional side of thoughts and then the resulting feelings of stress from that emotion in the body. So, and then the physical side of thoughts result in that feeling of stress in the body. So both of these together, emotional and physical, help you understand how that autonomic state means how you know that sympathetic or parasympathetic state you were in, or how much vagal tone you're in if you're thinking of the polyvagal theory. And the thing is, evolution just kind of wired us this way, and we're now beginning to uncover more and more of it, which I think is actually really exciting. And we're still just learning a lot of how it works. So it's still right now, it's kind of just a theory. But another idea is that as we evolved from emotions and as social animals, this newer evolution of the nervous system and the branch called the ventral vagus, which is actually just one of the branches of the nerves called ventral, explains the patterns of social engagement. As we are with humans, we're social animals. And this is why humans respond favorably to a concept called co-regulation, as I mentioned earlier, where connecting with other people is key. And that creates those positive relationships in our life and helps our stress levels stay down so that we're thriving in that green zone, in that social engagement zone. So while we're talking about the evolution of our species, let's talk about our abilities to use our advanced brain matter. Have you ever heard the idea of don't make an emotional decision? Or maybe you've seen someone make an emotional decision and you think, man, they're really not working with their whole brain. They're not using their full faculties. When you act out in the heat of the moment, you're often not showing your best judgment. And the triune brain is a way to think about that. It's an oversimplification, but it works well to think about it in context. So it's a concept that our brain evolved over the millennia, and as we went from our instinctual, primal, reactive, reptilian, or dinosaur brain which is where we then, through evolution, developed emotions and feelings like fear and just further emotions like love, for example. But then on top of that, we have the neocortex, where those are our really high functioning thoughts, where we have rational thinking and intelligence. So when you're using your rational thoughts, you're at the pinnacle of our evolution. You're responding, you're not reacting. But the more emotional you get or more stressed out you get, you kind of drop back down into the more primal areas of our brain. It's kind of what this oversimplification theorizes. And you start losing that capacity to think clearly. So when you're in neocortex or those higher brain functions, you're thinking clearly, using the rational part of your brain. Then as your stress tips into yellow or orange, your mental performance drops, kind of peaking over that Yerkes-Dodson curve. And you get into more of the limbic brain, where fear, anger, and shame start making the decisions for you. And then as the stress and emotions reach a breaking point, you just go primal, just animalistic, and you don't even know what you're doing if it's suddenly happening to you. One thing about this is some people go straight into this when they hear a baby crying. That is actually kind of goes into our evolution a little bit with you want to kick into a protective mode, so it just shoots straight to primal, because that's the evolution of our species, is our offspring, right? And this is a tactic, just maybe a little known fact, it's actually used in interrogations because this is known to people that this results in you losing your rational brain. You're unable to think. You're just so get this to stop. So they'll play the sounds of babies crying to get information out of people by just kind of short-circuiting their brain. How does this help us with knowing our stress zones? The critical key here is that knowing your stress zone is the first step in knowing which stress technique to use. If you're using the wrong stress technique, if you're in that red zone, it's going to be just worthless. So you want to know where you're at. And then developing that over time as creates that habit, and it becomes more and more automatic. So you go through the lessons in this course, divide it out over the bad stress that you encounter or perceive, and over time, it'll start to feel like second nature. And as you increase your flow state with increasing your coping skills and decrease that denominator of perceived stress, this starts to build resiliency. But first, let's build on the habit. Habit formation is a repeated action done in the same situation or same context. On average, it's said that you need to do this for about 8 weeks, give or take, to develop a habit. And a habit is defined as actions that are triggered automatically in response to contextual clues that have been associated with their performance. So what does this mean? For example, getting into a car is a cue to put on your seatbelt. That's where you go from the contextual cue to the action. Using the toilet is another one. That is a cue to take the action of washing your hands. These are repetitive, small little changes that you've learned these over time, and each time that you did it, it was just a small change, and now it's second nature, it just becomes automatic. That's how you know you've built a habit. To apply this to the course, you need to learn your cues of the emotional or physical trigger, and then the action will be to use a stress technique that you'll learn in this course. This will lead to habits and over time, more resiliency. All right, so now let's talk about the emotional and physical triggers so you can learn to recognize them. All right, this is that lower level, the low stress part of the performance curve where you're in the blue state, kind of going into the green zone. Blue is like that first second when you wake up for the day, maybe on a Saturday morning, you don't have a whole lot going on before any major big thoughts start downloading and you're just kind of awake and aware. Green starts going as you get up and get ready, you start doing your routine, you start to feel connected with the people around you, maybe say hi to your family or start, texting friends. And with green, your brain starts functioning more in that intelligent zone. You're more expressive, you're very self-aware. You're using the highest and more evolved parts of your brain, and the neocortex is in charge on this. The smart areas of the brain are firing, so your imagination, your creativity, and abstract thought come much more easily. You'll see this in other people because they'll look pretty calm, generally caring, very easygoing, receptive, grounded. You can talk to them. Then green, as it starts to rise, as the challenges rise, emotions can start to be like super happy, super excited, push the limits of your capabilities, but all in a very healthy way. People, you may perceive other people do this, like they'll start to talk faster, get really excited, and become really productive. Kind of like you've had your cup of coffee, You can start to accomplish amazing things. As I said, flow state goes here. Super cooperative, full of ideas. And if you're at home, maybe you're just like going through your to-do list, you're checking things off, feeling really good about it. You're finding your efficiency between doing the laundry, doing the dishes, paying the bills, and you're like, yeah, I'm totally getting things done. This feels great. From the blue to the green zone, physically, you'll notice people kind of like waking up in the morning. You move a little bit slow, you go to get your cup of coffee done, you start to move a little bit faster. It's still very purposeful. Your heart rate tends to be low and kind of rise a little bit as the level of exercise goes up. But generally, you feel pretty relaxed. As you go into those higher green areas where the challenge level comes up, but you're still in a great coping skill zone, you're doing a healthy balance of that sympathetic and parasympathetic. So it's kind of like getting into healthy exercise. Movements speed up, heart rate and blood pressure come up to the point that it's needed and still healthy. You're probably eating well, there's no major stomach issues, and the tension in your muscle is basically just matches the occasion. If I want to go for a 5-mile hike, my muscles will respond accordingly, and nothing in excess of that. So going into the yellow zone, and I definitely want to make a point here that being in the yellow zone for a little bit is actually a really good thing. That means that you're testing the boundaries of your performance and high performance states. So you're kind of delineating where your best performance is going to be, and you don't know what your limits are unless you maybe just go past them, which is great, and that's good, that's learning. But you just don't want to stay there for too very long, to the point that you start to nosedive into the orange zone, and that's when you start wanting to need more correction to get back into the green. At this point, when you're in the yellow zone, you're tipping that sympathetic nervous system into activation or high energy, and you've crested your high performance, your peak performance, and now you're dropping lower. Your performance starts to drop. You're dropping a little bit lower. At this point, you'll probably start to hear like, man, I'm starting to get stressed out, or maybe you may hear your friends say this to you. Sleep and appetite might get a little affected, but not majorly. This is also where you might start to feel a little bit of afraid, a little bit of anxiety, and frustration can start to kick in. You might feel like the tear ducts kick in a little bit, not terrible, but the beginnings of depression start here if you're chronically in it. So you can start to kind of feel feelings of like feeling inferior, maybe feeling stupid or embarrassed here. And you can maybe feel like you can get yourself out of it, like it's not so bad to the point that, well, tomorrow will be better. But it's just some of those not so good emotions related to stress can start to crop up. At this point, a simplification of your brain functions is that you kind of start to retreat from that neocortex down into those more primitive lower neocortex and limbic state. And emotions start to run the show a little bit more, and because you just can't connect as easily with that rational part of the brain. You're feeling a little bit more fatigued, a little bit more exhausted. At this point, basically you just want to be heard. You want to feel connected and validated to other people, but you're just maybe not feeling that quite as much as you want to be. This is where people might just need to vent a little bit, and again, just want to be listened to. When it comes from someone else, you may recognize they're in the yellow zone creeping towards orange zone when they maybe start complaining, or you're like, man, you're kind of whining a little bit. They're basically just wanting to be heard. And then emotionally, what you might see here also is that, on TV, this is where athletes will start to miss their shots. You've seen that they're kind of fatigued. You've seen that they've been playing the game and their mind just isn't in it. They're not doing their peak performance. And then another way to see this in person is people may also just start kind of glazing over when you talk to them. They can't seem to listen to reason as much, and things may tip over from like a nice friendly banter into like a more debate or a more argumentative mode, people can get demanding, get distracted. And then some people, everyone responds differently to stress. There's not like a one size fits all here. Some people, when they get stressed, they just get quiet. They get more distant and withdraw. And so whether they do the more outward signs of stress that are loud and obnoxious versus those inward quieter ones depends on the person. So again, there is no one size fits all, which is why it's so important for you to learn your own reactions to stress. Physically, in the yellow zone, your heart might start pounding a little bit. As I mentioned, there's some shame, embarrassment, guilt, anger, feeling scared, worried. Breathing may become shallow and fast as you progress more and more into the yellow zone. You may start to have that nervous stomach a little bit more, going to the bathroom too much, maybe not going to the bathroom enough. And you may start to feel like, I need to start fixing this problem with pills because it's impacting your life that much. You'll start to have body tension everywhere. It's not body tension that rises to the occasion. Now you're tipping over into the unhealthier levels of stress. So you might start to get migraines from that neck tension, some back pain kick in, aches and pains start to kick in. You may start to get cold sweats here and there. That fear and that anxiety starts to crop up now and then. And every once in a while you can feel that adrenaline kind of pumping with your heart pounding. And your body temperature may change where you feel too hot or too cold. Moving into the orange zone, anxiety really starts to step into the picture and play a much bigger role. You'll start to feel less protected, less safe. It'll feel like everything is against you. Everything's worthless. Like everything I'm trying is just not working. And this can make you really irritable and have a much shorter fuse. You may notice this in other people more than yourself sometimes. That, whoa, I just said hi and they bit my head off. What is going on with them? They're probably in the orange zone. At this point, your brain is retracting more. If I mentioned that triune brain going more limbic, and fears are kicking into a much higher gear. You may be feeling guilty all the time. You may want to avoid the world altogether. You may want to cry, shut the world out, or maybe the smallest thing will tip you off. Physically, in the orange state, you're reaching the highest levels of sympathetic activation, and your adrenals are really pumping out those catecholamines. So, and the stress hormones like cortisol are going up and up and up. So with those catecholamines like dopamine, norepinephrine, and epinephrine, which I actually use as an ER doctor to raise people's blood pressure if needed. But in an unhealthy stress state, these aren't good for you unless you need them in an emergency setting. But these can kick off naturally due to a perceived, not real stress, not real threat. So with that, the blood in your body responds to that with a higher heart rate. You start to breathe a lot faster. Your blood pressure goes up, as I mentioned. Your blood sugar will also start to rise. And this is all, again, for a perceived threat. Like this goes back to our evolution when we didn't have nice protected houses and we were facing, animal threats. And that cortisol, as I mentioned, also does damage to the body by impairing your immune system, which means that you may notice you're getting sick much easier. And when you do catch a cold or something like that, you are getting sicker for longer. With this also, with all of that catecholamine surge going through your body, you may feel a stomach upset because that rest and digest just isn't happening very well. And muscle spasm in your back and your neck really start to kick off, so you can experience much higher pain here. The jaw may get tense. Again, those migraines and the headaches become a lot more intense, a lot more frequent. And because of this, because of all of those, we call pressors is what I use them with, like the epinephrine and the dopamine, those are messing with your sleep. Those affect your brain and your circadian rhythm. And also it's just telling your brain, stay on the alert, stay on the alert. And your brain is responding to that because of a perceived threat. Okay, red zone. This is where you start really breaking down and things start to get critical. Emotionally, this is total burnout, total crash. This is the very, very tip top of the fight, flight, or freeze, and your sympathetic nervous system is at its pinnacle, and the vagus nerve is like, we got to shut this down. This is not working for us. So you've gone from feeling like maybe you can prevent a crash, like I know I'm crashing, but maybe I can prevent it, into just nosedive. Your nervous system has gone completely haywire and reaching towards that breakdown. You go from just feeling like you have some fear to like the fear is overwhelming, and maybe you feel like your life is in danger, is just constantly a real and imminent threat. So this is where rage, hate, hopelessness, shame, like intense shame lives, and panic attacks live here. The final step, as I mentioned, is that freeze. And according to polyvagal, that's the kind of end of the zones where you have complete collapse. You've got just immobility, you dissociate and just shut down. If you're worried that someone is here, they may seem to be reacting on almost just primal instincts. Again, thinking of that triune brain, you're going reptilian, you are going instinctual. So they may not be working at all with their rational brain. You just can't reason with someone who is in this zone. They may start to appear to be just unraveling, destroying their life, making terrible decisions. They're not thinking rationally. But here's the thing, everybody behaves in their own way. There's the outward collapsing and the inward collapsing people. Some people know what type they are, but sometimes you may perceive people, they look fine, but really they're one of those inward collapsing people. Their whole world is crashing down and you can't even tell, which is really hard to help someone like that. But there are some tips. They might just stop responding. They may not seem to be comprehend anything at all. This can actually happen after intense trauma. Like if you've seen someone after a car crash, they may seem a little dazed, but it's not necessarily because they hit their head. It's just the stress, that instant stress of that crash just sent them right into this critical mode. And again, your brain functions go to their most primal base levels at this point. It's tough to actually access or make memories at this point. It's known that when people go through intense trauma, they can't remember everything right off the bat. So police will need to, like a car crash, they'll remember details days down the line. So you actually, this is known in like law enforcement or in forensics recollection of events. And because of this, when you're in that critical point, learning and logic seem like totally foreign concepts. At this point, people are just wanting to feel safe again, that primal instinct. To get someone out of this, from what I've had to do in the ER, it requires a lot of eye contact, like one-on-one, really staring into their eyes, using a soft, slow tone of voice, not using big words. Remember, I can't say something like supercalifragilistic. I need to say yes, no, in, out, stop, go, things like that. Very, very basic. Sometimes if they're one of those raging types, they perceive everything as a threat at this point. So you may actually need to protect yourself because they're perceiving you as a threat, even if you're trying to be helpful. So you need to sometimes keep your distance until you can do those de-escalating techniques with the eye contact, the soothing voice, so that they feel safe again. They're just that's people just want to feel safe. Physically in the red zone, when they're having a breakdown, people will start to hyperventilate, breathe really, really fast, and that can lead to some body sensations that I'll go into in another lesson. If they are that kind of outward collapsing where they make it visible, they can become screaming, they can be violent, they can start punching walls, they can, just start, again, making really terrible decisions. And they are just totally out of control. If they're that kind of inward collapsing type, they may look totally immobile, they're not responding, they barely react, they won't make eye contact with you, you have to really push them to do it. And that can take some definite time to pull them out of it if they're in the inward collapsing. Pounding heart rate can lead to that feeling of anxiety and chest pain. And then at the very end point of the critical is where that collapse comes. So the body freezes, they are spent, their nervous system is in complete overwhelm, and that heart rate starts to drop. They become practically unresponsive to the human voice, kind of like catatonic, shutdown, or even fainting. This is actually very uncommon, but it can happen. All right, so remember that the point of all of this is to understand and be a student of your own stress zones, to take a magnifying glass to your own emotional and physical state as you go through these zones in your life. The red, as I said, is not all that common, but if you know you've been in that zone, that red zone that I described, think back to it and try and pull out what you felt emotionally, what thoughts were going through your head, and physically what you remember of it if you can. As I mentioned, sometimes the memories are hard to make in this zone. But definitely try to take everything you can and learn from each zone as you experience it. And you can go through all of these in a day. That is definitely possible. You just don't want to chronically live in the red or orange, okay? And all of this together is what we will use to develop that stress relief and resiliency and the goals of this course. To do that, you need to make this a habit. So making new habits, you want to, again, stick with it for about 8 weeks. Here's the thing. You want to go easy on yourself and give yourself some grace. Don't be so disciplined to the point that you feel like you let yourself down. You want to make this fun. You want to make this as challenging but enjoyable as possible. Try your best to dedicate about 10 minutes a day to the practice or doing a workbook, because you want to bring in that repetition to develop that habit. And another thing about developing a habit is that it helps to stay accountable to a community or, to activate your social engagement area, and to even have a buddy system or someone who holds you accountable in a friendly way to develop a new habit. Other people will definitely help you succeed if you reach out to them. So definitely use any social networks that you have to help yourself with this, and maybe help somebody else. Okay. Because, as you know, your trigger cues, you will know, because you know your trigger cues, you will know the stress relief action to take when you're in each zone. This course goes over the high stress areas that can become maladaptive. And then again, remember, the yellow zone is not bad. You want to get into that every now and then, and it's good to push your limits and challenge yourself. But you don't want to stay here too very long and slip into orange and red. One thing that I noticed, even personally, is that as you shift out of being always on that right side of the curve, the orange, red, yellow zone, and as you take out that like always activated high sympathetic area, and you go into the less high sympathetic, the more parasympathetic balanced green and blue zones, you'll develop more of that introspection, that positivity, and deepen your awakening in that green zone. And so these techniques can actually be used in that green zone in a good way once you learn them. So they will still help you once that resiliency is really built up. So the last thing I want to go over are the simple solutions. It's amazing how much, like I said, your brain can forget this when you go into that limbic and reptilian brain. So don't forget the simple, easy things that take almost no time and no money and no training to, or even, going out and practicing ahead of time. You can just do these right here and now. So when you're at the end of your rope, like I said, your brain gets scattered. Sometimes the obvious isn't so obvious. And I love checklists, so here is one for you. This is a fantastic way to stay grounded and regain that order in your head. And this is actually included in your workbook if you want to pull that out. So I'll just go through it real quick. So simple things, just go lay down. This is what we do in the ER when someone faints, right? You lay them down, you bring their feet up. When their parasympathetic has just gone poof. Turning the lights off. This is definitely a good calming technique that we use in the ER all the time. Drinking ice water or tea. That act of drinking just activates that parasympathetic because it innervates all those inner visceral organs. So the act of drinking water will help. You can always call a friend, which is to activate that lower green area, your social engagement zone. Or if the phone is the thing that's causing you anxiety, leave it in the other room. Put it on airplane mode. Don't even approach it, because I could get into that. But if you recognize that you get your stress cues start to trigger when you're using your phone, take a note of that. And when things hit, just set the phone down. You can listen to music. And another one would be walking away. As I mentioned, newborns screaming. That is a little known torture tactic. What you can do is just walk away. Just walk away from the situation. Most things will be just fine when you return from them. Even a car crash, just give yourself a few minutes to just settle down and then come back to it, because you don't want to go into that red zone and stay there. All right, going outside, even if it's raining, even if it's snowing, give it a try. It's that change in climate, that change in what you're seeing will help a lot, changing your perspective from not only visual but sensory. I mean, maybe don't go out if there's like a tornado coming, but, obviously within reason. Count your blessings. This is another way to think of just being grateful. Counting your blessings, what you have, and grounding yourself in practical facts to get yourself out of the emotions. Another one is journaling, meditation. You can make a list of 10 things with counting your blessings. So not just like in your mind, but actually writing it down. Doing something nice for someone is another key thing. So acts of kindness. A couple ideas, you probably know someone who's sick, or maybe someone who said like, I need to vent, send them a nice card, send them a gift, donate it to a charity in their name, something like that. Those are all ways to just do a quick pick me up. Exercising, I could go off on this. I'm a huge believer in exercise. Anything you can do. 5-minute flow even, that counts. Doctors harp on this all the time. You know it. Okay. And then finally, people forget about just watching a comedy, taking your mind off a situation, so more of a distraction tactic. Laughing is fun laughing is obviously fun, but laughing has been shown to boost your mood scientifically and activate your body's stress relief system. It's been shown to loosen your muscles and increase your brain's endorphins. So again, it activates that parasympathetic and that green zone from the polyvagal theory. All right, to summarize, we went over the triune brain as an oversimplification of the polyvagal theory, where thinking and perceiving is what calms your body down. We went over how habits are made with daily discipline and repetition to become automatic, and you just do that repeatedly over time to develop that automaticity in using these stress relief and coping techniques. And then we went over how discovering your zone through the physical and the emotional, these are body triggers that can help cue you in to what your zone is. And finally, don't forget those easy fix, simple things for when stress attacks in a big way. All right, here's your happiness bonus for this lesson. What you want to do is commit to 3 days, just 3 days of writing for 15 minutes each day. And what you're going to do is list out, just bullet point list your deepest thoughts and feelings about your absolutely closest relationship. Just pick one and stick to it for those 3 days. This has been proven to increase your lasting happiness and get you off that hedonic treadmill and raise your basic happiness level. Download the course materials at stressreleasesurvivalguide.com.